You mentioned this in postgame tonight, and I'm just curious how much of a theme it is these last couple of days, just finishing strong and the value of it, not just for this year, but on bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think I mentioned just like how sports is kind of a microcosm of life in many ways, and kind of gets lost, right? Because competition is real. There's a lot of emotions and people's investment in cheering for a team and financial commitment to supporting a university or teams or athletes or whatever. But there is still an element of real life and helping these young people be in position to be prepared for what's coming next, which, you know, for some of them it seems like a long time from now, but I've been there, right? It happens faster than they think. So it's always great to learn how to be a strong finisher, no matter what you're doing in life, and this team's gonna have an opportunity to do that Saturday for the regular season, and then next week in the conference tournament. And we're still gonna preach positivity. We're still gonna try to prepare to win as many games as we're capable of playing. Obviously, we know we have a really tall task if we want to continue beyond next week. But crazier things have happened, and that's the way I've always approached everything that I've done, is just focus on the next task. And if you're able to have a say in how you finish, then take as much control of that as you possibly can.
I asked Conor and Jamiron in here if what they're going through they feel has caused them to grow up a little faster, maybe, because you have to, when you deal with adversity, you kind of have to, and they didn't bat an eye. I mean, so whatever you've done from a mental standpoint, they seem to be strong with what's going on around them and ignoring a lot of the stuff you should ignore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we came into the season eyes wide open about the challenges that we would have. We certainly didn't think 12 wins would be where we were here. That wasn't part of the conversation, but we knew it wouldn't be easy. When you look at the landscape of college athletics, particularly basketball, and knowing that we would have to play some of these young guys probably before they were really ready to know how to win at this level. But it's also, in some ways, good for them, not right now, but as they move on in their careers, that they'll be better prepared earlier than maybe some freshmen who will be coming in the next year, having not had to play, and maybe being asked to make big jumps and be in games, that they haven't been in before, on the road, at home, and on a neutral court. So I'm proud of all these kids. I'm disappointed in the results that we've produced so far, and certainly gonna take every opportunity I can that I have to do everything to make it much better moving forward. But I really want to focus on giving these kids, particularly our seniors who don't get another chance, share with them the story I told you guys on Sunday about the last game I played as a college player. It took me probably 5 or 6 hours to take off my uniform, knowing that I wouldn't put it on again. And so I know what the reality that's about to hit those guys are. And so I want to try to make sure I want it to be enjoyable too. I don't want them to leave. That's why I was so disappointed the other day, because they won't get that opportunity to play in that building ever again. Like, that's how it's gonna end. And so I want to try to make as many positive memories for them as possible as they wind down their college careers.
You do a great job of putting the emphasis on your kids, which most coaches should. I'm not sure all do. But during this period, and I'm not trying to get too personal, what do you lean on? Because this is tough stuff.
Sure.
What do you lean on? Because you've got to lean on something.
And I would say it should be. I don't take for granted that I work in a very public facing, highly critical job. And again, I'm aware that there are a lot of really good coaches out there who just for whatever reason decide not to coach. They do other things for a living.
Sure.
So, but I lean
More
on my faith.
every day.
I lean on my faith because it's the one constant for 42 years and a month and 2 months and some change that I've been able to really have as a foundation that hasn't made me feel less than or inadequate. Does it make me try to reinforce some of my basic foundational principles of life? Absolutely. Sometimes I think, you gotta be able to adapt with the times as things have changed. Yes, but my faith, my family, my obligation to the people who believed to give me this chance, notably Coach Holder and the board at the time, and the people who still believe in us. I still very much consider that I have an obligation to that belief, and I accept the criticism. It's warranted in many ways, and my job is to not necessarily focus on that, but to also not dismiss it as not a real thing that deserves to be addressed when the time is right. But can't focus on now when John Michael Wright could be playing the last 80 minutes of basketball of his life here over the next week.
You've mentioned in the past, like the exit interview style things that you do with all the players at the end of the season. With the portal and things like that, do you start having those conversations sooner than?
Yeah, you have to. There's a sensitive balance. You don't want to be insensitive to the guys who you are focused on, trying to help them finish strong, right? And I don't want John Michael to feel like I'm giving up on his last week of college basketball, right? But there's a real, it can't be have your head stuck in the sand. I mean, there are people outside of our program called our kids, so they can't be hearing from other people how important they could be to them and not hearing that from me and my staff. So yeah, my first year, I would tell you, I didn't talk about next season until probably like a week after our last game. Needed some time to reflect, didn't want to be emotional about it, but you got to get over that now.
What are you kind of stressing to those guys whenever you talk?
I mean, everybody's situation's different, and so I won't share the specifics, but I want them to understand that a couple things really do have to happen. There can be nothing more important than having a winning season next year, nothing, and really being in a position where we're not even talking. And again, I know I'm putting expectations out there, probably too early, but I it's real. Like, I've been in college basketball 19 years, so I'm not blind of what the reality of not having success can do to you. Been there also, and so we need to be a tournament team. We need to be a team that's not even, fighting at this point to get in. So that's got to be priority one for everybody associated with our program, starting with me, but every player, every staff member, every GA. I want that to be the mindset of our administration. If I'm fortunate to be back, and I don't have any reason to believe I won't. I'm not trying to speculate, but I know that's a question, and so I don't want to pretend like it's not. So everyone's going to have to start there, and then from there, where we're trying to get them individually, depending on if an assistant coach wants to be a head coach, has to be a distant third or fourth to the primary goal of getting this program back where it needs to be.
So whenever you said you expect to be back, or you don't have anything that says you won't, I'm sure you see speculation just like
Sure.
we all do. How have you kind of handled that aspect of it? Do you talk to Chad? I'm sure you talk to Chad all
I
the
have
time,
conversations with Chad all the time, and we've never had a discussion about my job status in the middle of the season. And so, we're at the end. I don't expect to have a conversation like that before the end of whatever next week, right? But at the end of the day, my job is to try to put our team in position to win as many games as we can. I don't have any control over the ultimate outcome, and so I'm aware of it, but not focused on it. If that makes sense. I've got a family, right? I mean, it's kind of a natural deal, and so there's an element to making sure that you consider how it impacts my 11-year-old who's at an age where people talk about these things. I mean, we're in a small community. I mean, it's not a whole lot of places that he probably goes where he doesn't hear about his dad somewhere along the lines. I've got an 8-year-old daughter who's getting close to that age where she's in the sport. So it's a real thing. But like I said, I'm not trying to predict anything. My expectation is, I'm going to continue to work as hard to do what I'm supposed to do for the program until I'm told otherwise.
And then you mentioned that you guys need to be a for sure tournament team next season. It's probably the $1 million question, but from here now, how do you get to that point?
I mean, there are a lot of things that need to happen, and I'll say this: like the very first thing is I've got to grow as a coach. So I think sometimes when I talk about other things, it sort of feels like there's a deflection from we've had games where we've had leads and not closed them, right? We've had games where maybe we didn't shoot the ball as well and didn't find another way to win. So those are things that I'll evaluate before I talk about anything a player has to do. And we'll address the personnel issues that we need to address as the offseason approaches. And then, there's some of it that's still out of your control, right? I thought last year's team was an NCAA tournament team. Injuries, whatever, again, all of it sounds like an excuse, but we lost 2 starters for a good portion of the conference season, and we wound up 1 spot out of the deal. And so I do want to keep some things in perspective, right, as I approach it, and not try to address problems that don't exist. We have really good young talent. We need to continue to make those guys better. We need to coach better, and we need to make sure we give our fans something to come cheer for.
Do you sense, because Chad grew up in a basketball household, his dad, that's his job, he was a coach. Your communication, your conversations with Chad are, more real? I know that's a vague term, more real.
Yeah, I don't know. My direct boss before Chad was a coach himself, right? So, probably can't get more real, especially from a guy who was notorious for kind of being a make it happen kind of guy, right? So I've been fortunate to work for 2 really good people, people who've cared about me and the success that I've been able to have tried to invest, to the degree that they can, and us being able to be successful. And so, again, without getting into specific conversations, I feel very supported by him. I know us winning doesn't make his job easy, and so that my job is not to make his job more difficult. So.
We've talked a lot this season about your freshman players. You've got, for lack of a better term, a freshman coach on your staff. How is Keaton done this year?
Keaton's probably been better than even, and I thought he'd be good. Probably be better than I even thought he would. But I'm not surprised, having been around him now 8 years. Again, I hope this comes out the right way, but you never know, right? Keon Paige can't become the player he was or the coach he is if he doesn't have the work ethic that he has, right? Probably was doubted. Again, I didn't know him growing up, but I'm sure people looked at him all the time like, okay, I hear you, but there are a lot of Keon Paiges out there, right? Which is probably why not a whole lot of people get where he's gotten from a playing standpoint and now as a coach. But his work ethic is something that we've always been pretty in sync on, right? He understands it, because I wasn't that talented. He probably even as small as he is, right, was more talented naturally than I never could shoot as well as he could. But I've always respected his work ethic and his determination to overcome any doubt about his ability to have success in anything he wanted to do. So I'm very, pleased with him. I think his growth is going to continue, and obviously, he's going to, I think eventually be a really good head coach one day.
Jamiron, and I asked him this, he gives off the perception or the feeling, just being around him, he's older than he really is. Has he always been that way since you started recruiting him? And again, Scott brought out the point that he would go spend a lot of the summers on his own in Dallas to play club basketball or AAU ball. But has he always been a little older?
Yeah, as far as I know him, as long as I've known him, which hadn't been as long as some of the other guys I recruited,
Right.
but we've got to know him, and I think he spoke to the sort of being a man of the house, in some way, right, with just a single mom raising him, that he probably had to grow up a little faster even as a young kid. So being a little bit more mature, and we forget he was injured to start the season, and why he was able to kind of come on is just he's been able to be out there and practicing consistently and learning from Javon and competing against John Michael and listening to the cues from the staff and watching more film, just being more engaged. So his growth has been evident, I think, by everybody who's watched us, and it's certainly something that I'm hopeful will continue as we move into the offseason.
Just talking about next week, especially when you have younger guys, do you feel like sometimes those guys need to see something positive happen in a game that can really maybe energize them and give them the momentum to go out and like you said, create some positive memories going forward?
Yeah. I think oftentimes young people are driven by the outcomes, and less trusting of the process. So yes, the short answer is yes. But I think that eventually, as you get older, you realize the process can't change depending on the outcome, because you don't ultimately, again, the probably best example is shots going in. Like, are you taking the right shots? Are you ready to shoot them? Are you shooting them the same way every time? And you might shoot the same shot 100 times in a row, but the best shooters in the history of this game shot 50% from the field. So they missed half of them. And so, you know, I always preach that, but it's hard to get young guys to understand it because they're not used to not having success. And even the things that they've not done at the highest level before now, they've kind of just been glossed over. They haven't been a great defender. If they haven't been a great shooter, they've dominated so much in other areas that people don't even really talk about the things that they need to improve on.
Do you think, I forgot what day it was, Tuesday, that stretch that Conor, I think he slid over, forced a turnover, obviously he had the tip and the dunk. Do you think that was maybe his best stretch that he's had in some time?
In a while, yeah. You know, and this, again, I think kind of like he needed something to happen positive. You know, and I told him, like, because he was even doing it in practice where, like, he got to a point where he wasn't even looking at the basket when he called it. I'm like, hey, well, I always tell him, you're not allowed to play defense. Well, I always talk about playing defense, right? When we have the ball, you have to play offense. So if you're a guy who's not going to be a threat and teams can play off you and feel like they can help and play you to pass, you're almost helping the other guys. You're not allowed to help the other guys. Just like on defense, you're not allowed to think about the last shot you took or why you didn't get the ball. And so I respect that he's an unselfish player, but you have to be confident. It's the ultimate superpower in sports, particularly in basketball, particularly when you're young and you don't know enough. You got to go out there and have some effort to you. He doesn't have a whole lot of that to him, but we got to develop some of them.
Somewhere similar along those lines. A couple weeks ago, teams were sagging way off Eric whenever he caught the ball in the perimeter. He's since hit a couple threes, but I imagine that hasn't happened to him before, where people kind of aren't guarding him. How do you kind of talk him through what he's going? Did you just say, hey, you've got to shoot those? What's kind of going on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance to understanding if you're not making them. Like, Jamiron struggled shooting from outside the other day, but I'll appreciate that he's got confidence, but let's not die by 1,000 cuts, right? Let's drop the ball, try to get to the free throw line, try to get out in transition, shoot a layup or something, right? But there's also an element to not start doubting whether you belong out there. And that's a really hard balance to strike with freshmen. That's probably the biggest challenge anybody will tell you is they're either overconfident or have no confidence. It's very little in between. And the overconfidence, the lack of humility, really, those guys really, really struggle because they keep banging their head against the door. And then the underconfident guy, it's hard to put out there at all because the other team sees it too. And Bill Self's like, man, let's run a play at him, or let's say boo when he catches it, and he's gonna, have an episode. So there's an element to growth in that area as well that allows a kid to grow. But we've gotten so far away from the process that I always talk about. I'm not sure how much it's gonna matter because, as you see, I mean, guys just aren't taking chances with young guys as much, and we did that probably a year too long in terms of trying to play through a lot of freshmen early in their career. And so certainly one of the things that we'll continue to evaluate moving forward.
You've got Jeremiah obviously signed in that class. Do you anticipate taking another freshman, or you think it'll?
It's hard to say. I mean, some of it depends, right? The conversation with our current players, what happens. I assume nothing. Assuming I'm gonna have to have 12 separate conversations. Obviously, the guys that are leaving, trying to help them get where they're going, but the other 9 are, where's your mindset? What do you expect next year? What do you think you need to work on? How do you help us ultimately get this program from a success standpoint where it needs to be? And once we get on the page with that and know who we got coming back, we can attack, what we need coming in.
To the confidence in shooting, back to that, you would sometimes tell players that they need to shoot themselves out of slumps. Is that something that you tell them when they're losing confidence, or how do you judge when?
Depends on their skill. So, like Thomas is I always told him, if you don't shoot, I can't play you. Right? He didn't have another thing that he could really do to help impact the game on offense. So his superpower was going 0 for 8 and shooting 8 more, and maybe making 8 in a row, maybe being 4 for 16 at the end, whatever. You just got to live with it. For guys like Jamiron, that's not his only strength offensively. So how do you continue to impact? Can you cut more? Can you be a guy who maybe goes to the offensive glass, depending on if you're out there with John Michael and Javon, and you got those 2 guys getting back? Just athletically, he can make more plays. So it's not necessarily a singular thing. It's more play by player based on what they can actually how they can impact the game.
In terms of just, you know, trusting the process and kind of being the same regardless of what the results were, is there something that you see in guys, like, is there something you see that shows you that a guy's got that it's kind of clicked?
Yeah, it's very rare at a young player though. Cade was like that clearly. Cam McGriff was that way most of his career, and he played probably a little bit more as a freshman because he was physically ready. I've coached a few guys, but most of the young guys aren't able to get there until they go through struggling as a basketball player for the first time. And that's what you get when you get a highly touted player, and they usually come to this level of college basketball. They've never really struggled with basketball. They may have struggled with school or behavior or being coached, but like the basketball piece has always come fairly easy to them. And so they get here and they're playing against guys who are their side. Brandon Garrison, right? He's a great example in my mind of basketball hasn't really been hard. He's always been the biggest guy. He could always grab rebounds, and if he wanted to shoot a layup, he shot a layup. No one blocked his shot. No one blocked him out. Well, now everybody's at his position. Everybody's his size, or bigger, or longer, or more athletic, or can run the floor just as well. And so, how do you get him to continue to show up every day and just do the work necessary that you can last longer? Because there's a little bit of an outlasting your opponent element to becoming a great player over time.
But in those guys you mentioned, is there anything they would do either in games, after games, in practice that would kind of, I guess, that let you know, they're not just repeating the words you're saying, they actually get it?
Most of it's body language, so it's not necessarily something you can measure tangibly, but it's something, if you've been around basketball, a guy misses a couple shots in a row, and now he pouts, he doesn't get back on defense, or whatever it is. Well, the ones who've been able to just stick with, I believe in myself enough that this small piece of failure isn't going to define everything about how I feel about what's going on with me as a player, And so mostly it's body language in response to the actual failure, whatever it is, right? Picking up a couple fouls early, being in a shooting slump, having a game where you got high turnovers, like showing up the next day with the right frame of mind, not carrying the burden of yesterday's game, good or bad, because that happens as well. Like it happens where they play well, and it's hard to coach them in practice the next day because they think they got it all the way figured out, and it's very rare that happens early.